Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? We are very close to final exams now. I think we have 2 more weeks. Next week will be a talk from an invited speaker, and the following week after that will be a project presentation, right? So very close to final exams, and the course will be, we will have like 2 more weeks left only. So how are you, everyone? We have 25 students in Zoom, and let me check in YouTube. We have about 9 students on YouTube. Okay, so that should be okay. So while we're waiting for our friend, I will share the project assignment that I have given you in this link, right? So it seems like from the poll that it seems like it would be okay to have class maybe in the evening. And so I have arranged the class in this plan. So we'll start at 1:05 for I think it will be Thai version for computing students, and the AI and robotics students, we will start a bit late, around 5:15, because I have another meeting before then, and hopefully we will finish about 7, so we might have dinner together on Wednesday. I hope that's okay for you, but if you have like, some plan or something to do, just let me know, okay? I just want to show you the plan for presentations. And for any of you who's in any of the sessions, you don't have to go to another session, but if you want to listen to your friends, you feel free to come join for all the sessions as well. So I hope it will be fun. And from what I look from the topic, there are quite a lot of them involve machine learning, right? But maybe you're not using it. I'm not so sure, but roughly I've seen that there's many of them involve machine learning. So it will be interesting to take a look at what you've been, studying and working on. It will be nice. Okay. So that's a question. It's final exam will be take-home exam, right? I think it will be take-home exam, but it will be short, like will be short amounts of time compared to homework, because for example, like homework, I give you like 2 weeks, right? But maybe take-home exam, I would give you like 24 hours or 2 days, something like that. But yeah, I haven't really thought about that so much. But yeah, I really don't like to plan about exam so much, especially in online exams. So hate it. So yeah, hopefully it will be take home exam, except you have like suggestion and your friend agree. Okay. So yeah, hopefully it will be fun, and you'll see the link and on the timeline. So maybe can you prepare for presentation for like 7 or 8 minutes? And I think for each of the group, there will be one question from your friend. I will assign your friend to ask question for each group. So will be maybe one question. And for me, I would like to talk to every project, but maybe I don't have enough time. So I might give you some comment later. So please keep the time for presentation not over than 8 minutes or 5 minutes, it's okay too. 5 to 8 minutes. Okay. And you all have team number as well. So your score will be rated on your team number. Okay. So I think I have opened the live stream, and so I'll stop share this one and I'll share the slide. Okay. So how many students now? 13 watching on YouTube and 28 watching on Zoom. Okay, that should be okay. So today our topic is object recognition. Object recognition. So I was wondering if any of you working on the project about object recognition. If you're working on the object recognition, can you type one? Can you type one? But if not, you can type 0. You can type 0. I'm sure we have so many topics that we have studied from the first week until this week. I think this week will be last official lecture week, because next week will be a talk from another speaker. Okay, so some of you have been working on object recognition, but some not. I would be very interested to look at Eisen and Pongsapak project. But yeah, okay. So how about the progress? The progress for your project, rating from 0 to 100. How many percent now, the progress? Can you report me through the Zoom chat? Let me check. Oh, there's an answer on the YouTube as well. I will try to look at both YouTube and Zoom. So how's the progress? Report me. How many progress from 0 to 100? Okay. What about others? Maybe your friends help working on the project. Have you started? Any of you start? I have seen your topic. It looks so professional, and I think it will be very interesting. So I think you might have been, do some preliminary studies before you select which topic you are going to work on, right? So yeah. Okay, so today we'll talk about object recognitions, and I leave it for a very small short lecture for the last one, because I think it could be included in many other courses as well. For example, like it will be a lot about object recognitions in computer vision, I think, and maybe some other course as well. But I think you should maybe get some idea or rough idea about how you can work on object recognition, even though it is a basic thing. But for this set of slides that I have prepared for you, I think that it should be like something that's quite recent, even though it's not like a really like modern or 2021 paperwork or coding, but it's still modern in terms of you can adopt the idea for many different applications. If you are working with application for image processing or even other application that could involve, for example, like machine learning, something like that. So hopefully you get some idea for object recognition. So in this short amount of time for object recognition in this lecture, so basically, I want you to maybe understand about the fundamental workflow, that how can you create, or how can you come up with a technique for an object recognition, and maybe you can apply the system or the workflow for any other application. Or at least, like I said, that many of you have been working on a project maybe involved with machine learning or object recognition. So I think you might get some rough idea, and you can maybe get started easier. So yeah, the fundamental workflow, that is what I aim for you to understand today for, achieved object recognition. It doesn't have to be 100% correct or something like that, but yeah. And I will be talking about two main approach. One is called traditional, and another is the modern one. There are many ways to group an approach for object recognition, but I choose this one based on the technique, especially when we talk about object recognition. So let's see in the following slide then. So about today's contents, because we are working on object recognitions. So when we talk about object recognitions, we will try to recognize an object from its appearance, or its something you can call it patterns. Yeah. Next slide, I will talk about it as well. Patterns. And another word to represent patterns, you can use it quite a lot in terms of features. Features that could represent a set of image. So there were actually a number of features that have been developed in this society and I could not even actually it should be included in computer vision. So in order for you to be able to do object recognitions, I have bring one of the techniques that is very popular in the past. It's called histograms of oriented gradients, for you to see its idea and the concepts, and maybe you can apply with something else. And then I'll talk about the recognitions mechanisms, and that will involve one of the techniques called neural networks. And because I will talk about neural networks, so then I will briefly discuss about the convolutional neural networks, a very basic one, and the the first architecture of convolutional neural network is LeNet 5. And we will take a look at the demo to compare between the traditional approach and the modern approach. So I think the flow of today will be about this much. And at the end of the lecture, I think you will have to, work on my course wheel just to answer just briefly answer for several questions. And that will be class for today. So like I said, that we are going to talk about the object recognitions. So how can you achieve object recognition? So first, I have shown the flow for you to achieve object recognitions, and I'm trying to link the process in between to the previous subjects that we have been talking about, if you can remember. From since lecture one, right, from first week, we'll talk about the image acquisitions, and I've talked about the image sensors and how you can acquire a number of different modalities of an image. So we'll call this process image acquisition. And the input could be any type of an image, and it is based on how do you acquire it as well, based on the sensor as well. But basically, you can think about the camera and you can feed or the RGB image. That is the most basic one and what we have been working on like for the past 10, 12 weeks. And then what next? The following week, I'll show you how can you analyze an image using a basic components. If you can remember the keyword histogram, you can remember histogram, right? And you can use histogram to analyze a global information in an image. And then you can use that for a lot of transformation. You can use it for noise removal, image enhancement, and even to do segmentation. If you can remember, we use histogram to segment an image into a binary image using an automated also threshold, right? So that will be part of the pre-processing. And how about feature extraction? Feature extraction is actually like another huge lecture that I have not covered in this course, but it's actually has been mentioned a little bit, but it's not an advanced features to be extract. But the basic one, I think you'll get some idea about the basic features, and I will talk about it in the next slides as well. So to get an object recognition, you will have to do image acquisition, followed by pre-processing. It's optional. You might want to do it or not. And then you have to extract some features, or maybe you might not have to do that as well. But you will do the process recognitions. And in terms of recognitions, it could be categorized in many different ways. But in here, I have list as one, it's a rule-based approach. And another one is if you use machine learning, I will group them in terms of machine learning. For example, you use like an artificial classifier or deep learning, it should fall into this category. But if you just create a set of code to define the characteristic of an object, it means that you hard code how the object could be characterized. This could be called a rule-based approach. And finally, we will come up with the output, but it depends on what we want as well. For example, like this one, I want to see whether this is a cat, and output, it might show that, oh yeah, that's a cat. So that's like a basic workflow. You might not have to use every step. Some step might need, but some step might be optional. But in general, object recognitions usually comprise these all steps. So in here, I've mentioned about previous topic that we have been talking about, and you've seen that there are some topics are missing. Can you identify which topic that have not been included in here just yet? From all the lectures, which topic have not been included in here just yet? It's very obvious one, the one that's very, very big in before midterm exams. No, I thought there's an answer. What is actually missing? Which topic is missing? You must be wondering what I'm talking about. I mean, like I'm talking about image acquisition in chapter 1, in lecture 1, image enhancement, lecture 2, 3, and segmentation for lecture number 8, something like that. Have you noticed, are there missing topics? Filtering, filtering in terms of spatial or frequency. Filtering spatial or frequency, or both of them. So if we talk about filtering in spatial, right, we might talk about how can you do some pre-processing in an image. What about frequency domain? Do you think the process in frequency domain should be fall in which step? Which step might require frequency analysis, frequency domain analysis, like Fourier transform or frequency filtering and Dirichlet transform? Do you think which of the process might be linked to frequency domain analysis? Can you guess? Do you think frequency domain analysis may be used in step 1 or 2, 3, 4, maybe not 5 because it's output? One of your friends said maybe pre-processing. You might use frequency domain analysis in pre-processing, right? For example, because it's a part of filtering, it could be included as a part of filtering. So you might want to sharpening or you want to smoothing an image. Smoothing an image is quite important. And if you work in image processing, you might see that maybe require in pre-processing sometimes. Anything else? Anything else? The information in featured frequency domain, it's quite interesting because it represents the frequency of particular image, right? Particular image. So do you think it could represent a patterns in image or not? Do you think? Do you think it could be used for represent patterns in image or not? I hope you answer. Yeah, you can use to represent the patterns in an image because it's a frequency representation of a particular image. So it could be used, some work in the past has been used for feature analysis as well. And maybe image segmentations as well. So many techniques could be used. So yeah, so basically I just want you to be able to link between previous topic to this object recognition flow. So like I said, that how do you recognize an object? It is how do you remember? How do you remember the patterns of a groups of objects, right? Or a class of object, the pattern of that class. For example, if I ask you to identify orange and banana. What is the patterns of orange that could be different from banana? The patterns of orange and banana. Can you guess? How do you identify it's an orange or it's a banana? How can you identify? One of your friends said shaped. Shaped. Yeah, shaped. Shaped. Yeah, because orange has a round shape, right? But banana has a long shaped. Mm. Anything else? Anything else other than shapes? Color. Color. Because orange is yellow, right? And banana is orange. It's not funny. So orange has orange color, but banana is yellow. So color could be used to represent some characteristics of, between orange and banana. So that's could be included as the patterns of what we are going to work on. And if we want to apply image processing, we will always talk about patterns in terms of the arrangement of descriptor. So descriptor, it's sort of a vector. Descriptor is a vector that could describe a particular object. For example, you have a vector of x, and x contain x1, x2, and many more. X1, you can use it to represent the patterns of orange maybe in terms of shape, because it's round, something like that. You can assign x1 is round, and x2 could represent color. So orange has orange color. Whereas when we talk about banana, banana will have a different shape. Instead of round, it could have like a long elliptic shape, right? And it has the yellow color, something like that. So yeah, that could be a descriptor. But when we apply it in terms of the vector, it should be convert to numerical values, and we were not going through that so much, but yeah, you have to quantify the shape and the color in terms of the values. And this descriptor is also can be called as the feature descriptor too. Feature descriptor, because sometimes we'll talk about descriptor, it could be many things, but if we talk about features, we will probably know that represents something in the class of objects, and also maybe represent something meaningful of that particular class. And yeah, so patterns always represent in terms of a vector. So from this example, you'll be able to identify orange from banana. So it means that to be able to recognize an object, you're probably learning from sample patterns like color or shapes. But then how do you learn it? How do you learn it? Will you learn by yourself and then program it? So in here, I have separate how do you learn the patterns of an image into groups. So first is self-learning. The second is feature engineering. So feature engineering is how when you understand a problem very much and you'll be able to extract the key features from the problem. For example, we know that our problem is to recognize the orange. So we'll know that color is important and shape is important. So we use this as a features for orange recognition. So this, how we call it, feature engineering, this very basic one. And sometimes you might heard about it in terms of handcrafted feature. So it's like, how do you come up with a set of features to represent an object? So you might heard about handcraft feature. But because you know the best that what is the problems, then and how, and you know that you want to solve this problem. So that's why you can came up with with handcraft features. But how do you know it's actually the best feature that could represent your object? How do you know that it could be best feature to represent your object? In the past, there are many techniques to verify that your feature is best feature or good features or significant features that represent an object. But then what about we trained the model to learn the features by themselves? So there's another approach that we create a system that could be able to learn the feature by themselves. So I've called it self-learning feature. So that's why I have separate into two approach. The first one that we define what is the features for this particular application, object recognition. And another is we let the model learn what is actually the features from the sample from the past. So that's why the settings of this lecture I have separate into self-learning and feature engineering. So it actually represent the modern approach. We are going to use deep learning, and we'll let deep learning learn about the pattern by itself. And another is the traditional one. So these are the key message of this lecture. I want you to see the modern approach and compare with the traditional one. So I have given you an example of features. So there's another example of features. In this case, is they're trying to, sometimes when we talk about object recognition, it's very broad. Object recognition is very broad. So many times for the basic, a very, very basic object recognition, I would probably talk about image classification, a very basic one. Image classification. So we will categorize image into many different classes. For example, in this example show 3 flowers, right? 3 flowers. They were called Irish flowers, but they have actually different species. The first one is versicolor. Next one is virginica, and the last one is setosa. So if you take a look at them like roughly, you might not see the difference. But if you take a look at detail, do you think, are they different? Are they different? And in terms of what are they different? I think I have given a hint a little bit in the picture. Are they different? Do you think these 3 species of Irish flowers? Do you see it different? Yes, yes, right. And in terms of what have you noticed? So in the iris flower, I have labeled some specific features, I call it features, or the features of the flower itself. So they have the petal and sepal, petal and sepal. And they have actually different shapes of petal and sepal for versicolor. And how about virginica? Virginica. So for virginica, compared with versicolor, the small one would represent the petal, And the longer one would represent the sepal. And if you've seen that the positions of the petal and sepals are different from versicolor as well. For the last one, setosa, you see that the petals are very small compared with versicolor. And the sepals are very long, but it's also thin as well. So the key features to classify these three species of iris flower, one of them are petal length, the petal width, and sepal length, sepal width. So they have collect the length and the width of the sepal and the petal of these three iris flowers and use them for categorize or recognize different iris flower species. So that is another examples of feature. The next example is very familiar, right? It's very similar to the homework, right? The homework. So have you worked on homework yet? I think your friends very hardworking. They have been asking about the homework already. So yeah. So another examples of features it show in this slide. So this slide show the image of a clock, right? A clock, and they have minute hands and an hour hand. The short one, the longer one, minute hands and the hour hand. So how do you be able to identify the time for each of the clocks? It sounds very simple application, but it's not so simple, right? So how do you do? How do you identify the time from the clock? Any idea? Any idea at all? Can you suggest techniques that you have learned from image processing to be able to identify the time from a clock? What do you use? So I will see in your homework, right? So in this case, if you learn the sample for every pixel from an image, it will be so burdened, right? And there are a lot of information that are not linked to the core information, which is the hand, the minute hand and the hour hand, right? So if you use raw data image pixels, it may be not the best idea to use that as a features, maybe not the best idea. So they have proposed the better features by using the coordinate of the minute hand. I think this one is minute hand and the hour hand. So they've used the coordinates of them and we'll be able to identify the time from this information. But even better features is how they have reduced a set of information from an image which contains a number of pixels and then reduced into 4 informations of the coordinates of each hand. Now it reduced to only 2 features in feature descriptor, which is the theta 1 and theta 2. Where theta 1, I think it's represent the angle of the minute hands, and theta 2 represent the angles of the hour hand. So you'll see that from only 2 information, you think you'll be able to identify the time or not? I think you can, right? If the origin is at the center of the image, I think you will be able to identify the time from these only 2 information. So you'll see that features are very important, and it's very big chapters. It's another chapter that you can dig down, that what you can use to represent each individual's image. And in the past, they have been developed and proposed and algorithms quite a lot in terms of feature extractions until deep learning came. Feature extraction still remains, but not so much as popular as deep learning. So yeah, feature is important. You see that you have only 2 images, but you can reduce the information from a number of pixels into remains to only 2 information. And you can use that to identify the time. So feature is important. So like from this application, you've seen that feature engineering or the handcraft features could make a problem easier. You can express it in a simpler way, a smaller way as well, and low computation as well. But you have to understand the problems. That's a problem. You will have to understand the problems in depth as well. But if the problem is not so complex, that could be fine, right? So how do you come up with the features? So I have to refer back to the previous topic and lectures. So the most powerful one is actually color, because you have color and you'll be able to identify things easier, but you've never been colorblind. But I think even though you cannot see colors, you will be able to identify an object as well. But I think maybe the sensitivity is not as much as you'll be able to detect colors, I think. So color is very powerful. And if you remember, you have many different color models. You can use many different color models. And there are also something called texture as well. In texture, there are mathematics behind the texture, but it does not include in this course. But I think you can take a look at more detail in terms of texture extraction feature. What does actually mean by texture? For example, if you touch some surface, and you will be able to say roughly what's actually feels like on a texture. It could be smooth texture. It could be smooth texture, or it could be rough. It could be rough. It means that it's inhomogeneous. There are a lot of variants, or you can say that it's high contrast if an image contains high contrast. High contrast, it could be identified that the texture is not so smooth as well. So there are many different descriptions for texture representations, and there are many different techniques that you can take a look at in more details. And shape is very interesting. For both of them, they have like a lot of library in Python that you can, take a look at and bring some of the key features to use it. Especially shape, it's quite interesting. You'll be able to identify how round, if an image is round, or if an image is circle, or it's elliptic, or it's an ellipse, or it's a square, or it's a rectangle, or so on. But it might have to be like a basic, basic shape, but you can combine them all together to represent maybe a more complicated shape using shape features. Many things combine, but the most powerful one is actually this one. It's edge detections. Like you said, like you have seen that I've been talking a lot about the edge detection, because it can be used to separate from one area to another, or one object to another. So it's actually represent it's actually very close to how your eyes detect an object as well. It's actually not only based on color, but based on the edge or the transition from color to another color. So edge detection is very powerful for us to be able to recognize an object. So why not use that for create an object recognition as well? So it's very powerful one as well. First and derivatives. For example, the basic one is Sobel, detector, Prewitt, and Canny, right? But in reality, you cannot just use only the basic information because the actual object could be very much complicated. So in the research in this area trying to improve or trying to develop features that could represent different objects using the primitive sets of features like color, texture, shape, and edge, and combine in some certain way. So the next sections, I will talk about one example of an advanced feature. I think it's advanced. It's advanced features, which is based on, could be based on so many things, because even though we'll talk about edge, right? It is also represent the texture and an image as well. So yeah, so the features that I will talk about today, it's the name called histogram of oriented gradient. So like I said, there's a lot of advanced features that has been developed for the past like 10 years. But there are some of them are very powerful. In this slide, I think I've talked about two of the features that's very powerful. The first one is histogram of gradients, or HOG, we call it HOG as well. And another one is scale invariance feature transform. I remember first time I read this paper, I found it's quite fascinating that how they can find the features that invariance to scale. It's mean that you can detect a small cat, large cat, or a very large cat. It's mean like scale invariance feature. So it's very amazing. It's called SIF feature, scale invariant feature transform. SIF features has been proposed by Low in 2004. And another one is histogram of oriented gradient. Sometimes you heard about it in terms of HOG. It has been proposed by Daran and Trick in 2005. And both of the techniques are powerful, and they are based on the gradients or edges of an image. So in here, there are steps or the details of how they create a HOG features. And in the next slide, we will talk about the recognitions and trying to combine HOG and recognition techniques to do the demo in object recognition. So for HOG features, if you open the paper of Dalal and Tricks, inside, it's a paper in 2005, inside there are steps to calculate HOG features. In here, it shows 6 different steps, So an image has been input in system or the feature calculation. So I'll talk about the input first. So input just an image, right? And output for Dalal and Trick, they have applied HOG with the person classification. So it shows as a very powerful feature for person detections using HOG transform, HOG feature, sorry, using HOG features. So in this case, we input image, output will take a look if that a person or not, So there are 6 different steps involved. So first, they'll do some normalization in terms of gamma and color. Do you still remember gamma, right? Gamma transformation, that you're trying to make an image brighter or darker depending on the values of the gamma, which has been mentioned in image enhancement. So here it could represent the pre-processing, right? The pre-processing in the object recognition workflow. The pre-processing. And then what next? So when they're sure that, oh, the image is quite, in good quality, in good conditions, all the values has been normalized and the color has been normalized. Oh, in here, in this paper, they are not only use RGB color, but they are also explore the LAB color space as well. For our LED, if you can remember, they have separate the component of the color into two sets. One is achromatic, right? And another is chromatic, which represents the colors in an image. But if I remember it correctly, I think they said that RGB work best. I think they work with grayscale as well. So the first process, Dalal and Trix has been working with colors, normalizations, and power law gamma equalization. So when the image is in a good condition, they have worked with they compute the gradients in the second step. They compute the gradients in the second step. You can remember, we talked about the HD texture, or how you can compute gradients using many different filter, right? Using it's called a mask, right? If you can remember. So many of them, for example, like here I show there are Sobel as well, or there are Canny Prewitt Roberts as well, right? If you can remember. So in this paper, they have explored many different derivative masks, or they trying to use this mask to compute the gradients in an image. And then what's next? It comes to the third state. Before we go to the third state, let's take a look at all the gradient here first. So do you think which one will work best for this paper? Can you guess? Because they have explored many different edge detector or the gradients method, right? But there are one technique that they have mentioned that work best. Can you guess which one? The first one is center, you can type 1. Second one is uncenter. The third one is diagonal. The fourth one is cubic corrected. And the fifth one is Sobel. Sobel is very popular, right? Can you guess which mask work best for Hawk feature? Which mask work best for Hawk features? Can you guess? Yeah, if I were you, I will select Sobel as well, because Sobel, it's large. It's large. It could, contain many different informations, and it also has been well developed as well. Any others? Yeah. But I actually gave a hint in here. The one that worked best is only just a simple 1D mask. So simple, but work. Simple, but work. So I think they have mentioned in the paper that this one worked best for this application, the one in the center. But I think this one is only one directions. If you remember from the gradients, they will have to compute two direction, X or Y, that we have been, confused with the concept of X or Y, but doesn't matter. It could be X or Y, but you have to compute both of them, X or Y. And then once you get X and Y, you can calculate the magnitude, right? The magnitude of particular pixels using this mask. And you can also compute the orientation, the orientation based on the X and the Y that has been calculated from X and Y direction mask as well. So in the second step, you will apply the derivative mask and finally get the set of orientations represent each pixel. For example, you have like 4x4 image. When you compute gradients in step 2, you will probably get the magnitude and orientation. And orientation could be, in many different directions, from maybe 0 to 360 in a unit circle, right? So it could be any directions. And this direction will be computed in the next step. The directions will be, the orientation will be compute in the next step. So the third step is weight vote into spatial and orientation cell. Spatial and orientation cell. Because the actual orientation could be ranging from 0 to 360, but we might not take this one, but we start from 0, right? So it could be many different values, could represent the orientation. But if you represent every degree of orientation, it will be a very large descriptor to describe this image or only individual pixel. So they have represent the orientation from 0 to 360 into number of bin. And to make it very simple, you can use it to represent maybe 8 bins, 8 number of bin, 8 bins. So the orientation that is ranging in particular bins could be, accumulate in its own particular bins. But in this case, they have used weight vote. So it means that it's not just only round values that is close to the orientations of individual pixels, but they have to weight and vote. I think I've seen it roughly. It means that if you calculate a pixels and you get, for example, this one is 8 bin, right? 8 bin will start from 0, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this one is 45, right? And 90. This one is 155, 180, and so on. So if you find any pixels has orientation as 90, in the third bin, if this one is bin index 0, bin index 1, and bin index 2, the bin index 2 will be count, will be accumulate for this particular bin. But it will have to look at the magnitude as well. Sorry, we have to look at the magnitude as well. For example, 90 degree with the magnitude from X and Y, for example, like they have like maybe 4. So we create a bin, right? And it will call a feature descriptor. Bin, feature descriptor. And we have 8 different bins. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So first will be initialized with zeros, but when for first pixels actually fall into 90 degree. So the index here is degree 0, right? And then 45, 90, 135, and so on. So the values at 90 degrees has a magnitude equal to 4. So this first pixel will be assigned the magnitude accumulate in the feature descriptor index of, 90 degrees, and the values equal to 4. But if the next pixel has the values of, you see, 22.5, 22.5, and the magnitude for this particular pixel is 4 as well. So 22.5 is actually in the middle between 0 and 45. In a very simple case, in a very simple case, we would, round it. But in this case of weight vote, they will have to weight these values and vote into between bins. So in here, 22.5 very close to 45 and 0. It's in the half, right? So the magnitude will be vote for half of them for each index for 0 and 45 degree. So these values of 4 will be assigned to 2 here and 2 here. So it's weight vote for the values. So that's how you can, calculate the feature descriptor. And now it's only the second pixel, so you can continue for another pixels and accumulate to create a feature descriptor for particular area, for particular area. I said area because I haven't defined what is the area it's called. It could be the whole image or anything, but I'll talk about it. Okay, so now you see how can you create a feature descriptor. And next, the step it's sort of swap a little bit. In this step, that I've talked about the spatial orientation binning or weighted in here, right? As you can see that my example has some several pixels. So before we actually assign into a bin and orientations, they have first partition an image into non-overlapping cells. Non-overlapping cells. For example, you have an image of a human. You partition them into non-overlapping cells, and this one is cell 1-1, cell 1-1. And then in histogram of oriented gradients, they also have another definition called a block. This block is a set of cells that comprise altogether. For example, each block could have like 2 by 2 cells. So this could be one block. This could be one block. For the cell, it's non-overlapping, but for the block, it could be overlapping in an image. So the feature descriptor that I have been mentioned in the previous slide is actually calculated from a set of pixels, which is called cell. This cell will be calculated for feature descriptor. For example, you have 8 bins. So for each cell will have its own feature descriptor. And then what's next? They have arranged the histograms in terms of Hawk feature vector. Hawk feature vector. As you can see that one block contains 2 by 2 cells, right? So one block, for example, block number 2 here, it can contain 2 by 2 cells. So you can have a feature descriptor for different sets, represent each cell. So in feature descriptor here, I could write it very similar to this way, is H, C, or maybe X, Y, depending on the dimension. So the feature descriptor here represents the feature descriptor in individual cells. And then you just do concatenation or the histogram of gradients of each cell altogether to represent block. And then you concat for each block altogether to represent the Hawk feature vector, the Hawk feature vector. The individual Hawk feature vector could have dimension of 1 multiplied by number of bins. For example, we pre-select 8 number of bins. Individual Hawk feature will have 1 by 8. But when combined all together, it depends on number of block and number of block and the cells in the block as well. So the dimensions of the overall Hawk features could be very large or small, depend on how do you partition an image. And we will see in the demos that if we have particular image and we divide them, partition them into non-overlapping cells and group them into blocks, and how we represent the HOG feature, okay? So we'll see how we can create the HOG features in the demo. So yeah, so finally come up with the HOG feature vector. And for individual HOG feature, you'll get 1 by 8. So from this process, you get all the HOG feature from each cell combined into each block. So you'll get like a very long, vector of HOG feature to represent the whole image. And they have not finished just yet. They have got the HOG feature from weight vote into spatial and orientation cells. But after that, they'll do some normalizing. Over the overlapping spatial block to, trying to normalize all the values into the same standard. So the fourth process is to do the contrast normalization. For the last process, they have collect HOG feature all over the detection windows. In a very simple example, like I showed you in the previous slides, I refer window as the whole image. So it will be, very simple. You already get the HOG descriptor from this process already. But in some case, they have like divide an image into many different windows. For example, could be something like this. So in the last process, they have to combine all the HOG features in the window levels as well. So you have seen that they have trying to partition an image into many different levels, like non-overlapping cells, overlapping blocks, and also in terms of windows as well. And then after that, they have put the feature descriptor into something called linear SVM. Linear SVM, we will not talk about the detail in here, but basically linear SVM is machine learning technique. And basically, it's trying to classify a binary set of information out from each other based on something called support vector. It stands for support vector machines. So they're trying to separate two groups of information out as much as they can based on something called support vector. So there has been involved a lot about the distance between the data sets and the support vector and the main hyperplane. And there are quite mathematical proof behind SVM. So I think I will not cover this in this slide, but you'll just realize that the linear SVM is just a classifier that trying to separate different of the groups out from each other. Even though originally SVM is basically classifying a binary problems, for example, group dot or group X, but they also have, the research has proposed an advanced technique. So SVM can be able to identify multi-class objects, can be worked with multi-class classification problems as well. So if we compare with the workflow in the beginning, you'll see that in this process, it will be part of recognition, and using machine learning, but all the features that's being calculated and correct, it's all in here. You'll see the main feature extraction. And here it's sort of pre-processing, right? So this is the process to come up with Hawk feature, a very popular one in the past. And this is some result. For example, an image has been partitioned into a number of cells, right? So each cell could have its own Hawk feature descriptor. And you see that if you take a look at it very closely, you see a values inside of each cells, and you see that it show histogram of orientations. You see that it's sort of histogram of orientation. It means that it could have some values in some orientation, and maybe some orientation does not have values. For example, like this cell does not have any orientation in any direction at all, but this one has one direction, something like that. So then you can combine them all together and use that a window and use it for classification. For example, this one is a histogram of oriented gradients that represent a bicycle. And for its original paper, it's actually trying to solve the person classification. So this is the result from the Hawk features. From Hawk features, it could be visualized and represent. So if you take a look at this, you see this is the feature that represent human. This is the feature that represent bicycle. So it's quite makes sense for you, right? And give you a confidence enough for you to feed them all into the machine learning techniques and let them identify the object that you want to take a look. So the next step, I will show the demo of the Hawk features, and I already provide you a link of Colab in my course view already. I think I have put the link in my course view. Yeah, it's here. It's in demo here. So if you click inside, it will link you to the Google Colab, which is show the demo of the object recognition today. You can modify them by copy the Colab into your own drive, and then you can, modify some code if you want to. So I think I will start modifying. Maybe I should copy them as well because there are some results that I want to leave it that way in case that it might be some error, and I can refer from that. So in here, I think I have like three demos. Let me show. Yeah, 3 demos. First is the demo of histogram of oriented gradients. And if you see the mechanisms of how to calculate Hawk features, you will be able to write it by yourself, right? Maybe take a little time to do it, but I think the help library, you can start from that, because as you can see that for a more complicated application, there are proposed a further and more complicated sets of features. So I think you should start from the feature that's very popular and basic one, and where you can improve the performance from that. So in here, I think I use Hawk feature from Scikit image features. So I think you can run it from here. And even the image is also an open source, the astronaut image you can remember from Renner filter, right? So this is the astronaut image. You can use the HOG functions, and you can input your own image inside. In the first parameter that you have to put it in is the number of orientation bins that I have mentioned that could identify how the details of the orientation you want to represent in an image. For example, for this one, the orientation that we use is the number of bins equal to 8 bins, and it represents every 45 degrees, right? of orientation, group of orientation. And number of cells is very important because it represents the Hawk features. So here we use the 16 by 16 pixels to represent a cells in Hawk features. And for the block, in the example in the slide, they use 2 by 2, but in here use only 1 by 1. So it basically mean that one cells is actually one descriptor that represents, particular cells, and then combine them all together to represent the whole image. But in here, I think once you calculate Hawk features, you'll get feature descriptor. FD, feature descriptor, is the vector that I have been mentioned. And Hawk image, it's basically they have plot an image of a histogram oriented gradient for you. It will be easier for you to visualize what is actually going on in your own image. So it's very nice library to use. So if you run from this one, you'll and then follow by the visualization. So this one visualize an original image, and then for Hawk features, they have found that the values for visualization is quite small. So they have rescaled it a little bit into the range of 0 to 10. So make it easier for you to visualize. But I think we'll not use this one for computation or anything, just the purpose for visualization only. So you'll see that for this particular image, you're seeing the orientation is different in some particular area. It could represent the cells in the astronaut image. You can try it on with any other photos. And if you take a look at the area of has a very smooth texture, I mentioned about texture again. You're seeing that the astronaut has, details in her body, but for this area that very smooth, the histogram of oriented gradient show very small values. So it represents it demonstrates that, oh, there may be no much of details in here, and that could be used to represent area of smoothness. So yeah, that's the first features, the histogram of oriented gradients. In the next sections, I will use the histogram of oriented gradients to apply with the object recognitions using the open source data set, which is, I think it's MNIST data set. It's a very famous one because it's a large data set, but it contains information, a very informative. It contains a handwritten digits, and you can use it to test your image classifications. You separate the classification into 10 class because the digits has from 0 to 9, right? So yeah, I will use Hawk features to for digit recognition with MNIST dataset in the next section. All right. So from here, do you have any questions about Hawk feature or not? Oh, I think I should run it and then show you the characteristic, the descriptor, sorry. So as I run it again because I'm not sure if they have a memory, the previous memory or not. So you see that the original Hawk feature is FD, right? So let's take a look at the shape of FD. The shape of FD. So what I've seen, it said that, oh, this feature descriptor is about 8,000. The dimensions of it, it's about 8,000. So it's quite a lot, right? But how it can be 8,000? So let's take a look at the original image of the astronaut. So we'll use the image dot shaped. So this image is 512 by 512 multiplied by 3 because it's RGB. But I think when we use it, mm, when we use it, I think it could be grayscale. I think it should be grayscale. Yeah, just basically just think about it in terms of grayscale. So the image of 512 by 512. So if you divide them into cells in the configuration, we use 16 by 16, right? 16 by 16. So we will have like 512 divided by 16 cells and multiply by 512 multiplied by 16. So this one is actually total number of what? Of cells in an image, right? So let's take a look at it. So this is the number of total cells. Yeah. So it's 1,024. But then for each cell, you will have to represent them into 8 bins, right? Into 8 bins. So the number of the size of feature descriptor is equal to the number of cells, multiply them, and then multiply by number of bins. So this feature size would have been 8,192, which equal to the FD shape. So it calculate them correctly. That's all. Okay, so that's about Hawk features. Before we continue to the next sections, I think in the next sections it's about neural network and then convolutional neural network. So do you want to take a break, like 5 minutes? Your friend asked what is FD. So FD is feature descriptor. So FD is actually Hawk feature descriptor that represent the Hawk features combined from the whole image, combined from all the cells together, and each cell will have 8 bins. So that's why the size is just here. Okay, so FD is feature descriptor. Okay, so I think I will take a break like 5 minutes. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. So we'll take a break from 14:27 to 14:32. Okay, 32, and you'll come back. Okay. Here. So this is back time. Okay, no questions. So I'll see you in 14:32. I was wondering where is the rest of the students? Where is your friend? Do they have exam or anything? We have like 30 students. Another 11 on YouTube. Okay. All right. Have you been back? How do I know you're back? Can you type um what should I a smiley face? Smiley face if you're back already. Can you let me know that you're back already by typing smiley face? Yay. Oh, good. Okay. Okay. So in the first part, I hope you'll get an idea of a feature extraction that has been developed from a primitive gradients. They have added, components like normalizations and some preprocessing and divide them into a grid, something like that. So in the past, we are having so much fun trying to develop features, but the time has changed. The time has changed. So the train has been changed as well. So let's see. So now we have a features. We have hot features. And how are we going to do about it? How are you going to do about it? How do you identify the person in an image? How do you identify a person from an image? Let me um, open the here again. Right, I said, will you do a hard coding that, oh, the orientations of the human will be fixed in some certain way that would be very less flexible, right? Or can you be able to identify some area of, the face or the bodies, and maybe you write some code to, you know, make sure that they are humans. So that will be another way to do it as well. But the train will come that when you design a features, they will put them into machine learning techniques. And in the process, I use the keyword recognition as the learning the learning model, the models that you have to create. And the model here will have to learn the patterns from the samples, right? So there are process involved which call train models. So in this process, uh, I have I have one more which is almost exactly the same. It's just only that in the first part, the process is actually training process. But for the second part, we take the models that calculate from the training process and use that for recognize the new and incoming image. But for the new incoming image, you will have to pass them into the same similar process before you use the models and get the output. So in these sessions, we will talk about one of the machine learning techniques that we will use in a part of recognitions, and that is will try to develop the models. to identify the object using Hawk feature. So the machine learning technique that has been chosen in here is neural networks. Even though neural networks is one of the course, right, in our department. Does anyone have been study about neural network before? I think many of you have maybe came across maybe in some course or maybe some training or project as well. So I'm sure that you will be familiar with them in certain way, right? But in this course, I'll just talk briefly about neural network. So be able to use that to categorize the features, especially Hawk features. Oh, that's true. ขอบคุณค่ะ Okay. Sorry. So you didn't see this slide at all, right? Yeah. So yeah, I'll talk about the train models. And we create models here. We'll use the neural network, and then in the part of prediction, we will recognize an object using the trained models here. So in neural network, you will probably see some architecture, something like this maybe, like this maybe. But the basic components in neural network, it's called neuron. It's called neurons. It could represent neurons in our human brains, either or the neurons in computations as well. So we use the same word for the neuron. The neuron here are the nerve cells. It's actually the biological cells, right? And it could be used to show the ability to process some information from information. So this one is the image of brain neuron. So the brain neuron has some certain components that I would like to link to our neuron in neural network. So our neuron in neural network will be something in circle like this. And we'll probably have something like inputs, and maybe output. Maybe this one is very simple one. So a neuron or a nerve cells, what actually has something similar. Actually, neural network has been developed that trying to copy or imitate how our brain works. So that's why this one is neuron, and they have components called dendrites, and dendrites will become a receiver to receive some information. Another component is axon. Axon is used for transmission. So dendrite will act like the area of the input into the neuron cell. And the output represent the transmitter or the axons. And about at the edge of axons and dendrite, they will have some junction from one neuron to another neuron. A junction here. Sometimes I feel like it's called like a synapse or a junctions to connect one neuron to another neurons. And the synapse is very important. Some paper that said that synapse is sort of like a space from one neuron to another neuron. So when you want to send an information from one neuron to another neuron, if the gap is very wide, the information may be leaked a little bit, right? And will transmit a very little to another neuron. But if the synapse is very compact or very close, very small gap, it means that the information can move from one neuron to another very easily. So this synapse could be act like something called the weight values the weight values. For example, you have one neuron and you want to link them to another neuron, maybe another neuron to another neuron as well. And this neuron could be input or could be another node in neural networks, but it contains information, for example, like X1 or X2. The information to transmit to the next neuron could have to be past the synaptic function, a junction, or in neural network, we'll call it like awaiting values. For example, W11, it means that transmit information from X1 to maybe Y1. Y sounds like an output, but yeah. So the weight value is Y1 is W21. So these weighting values will emphasize that how much information of X1 that you want to transmit to Y1, okay? So if you write something very simple is Y1 is equal to W11 multiplied by X1 and plus X2 multiplied by W21 if the network is small like this. So Y1 it look like this. I think that's maybe there's some noise around. So that could be information that in another node that passed from the previous node, right? That information can carry, if you have many neurons to the next layer, you will be able to create awaiting values for different information come from, from the beginning layers. But when we work in computation, the values that it gets at the output from the weighting value X, in this case, I write it in terms of a metric. This one is metric. It could contain many different weighting values, and X is the vector of X or the input to this to this neuron. Another keyword is in neural network, a simple model of neural network is called perceptron as well. If we talk about only one, node, I'll talk about, sometimes I use it in a similar way to a simple neuron. So if we talk about one simple neuron, it could maybe, you can call it a perceptron. But if you have many neurons and you combine them in many different layers, that could be called multi-layer perceptron as well. But let's take a look at a simple one first. So in computations, you just find the calculation of y of the weighting values multiplied by the input x. The values could be very much varies, and it's all depend on x. So in computation, they have add some bias that are independent from the inputs and also assign a function, which is the function that could make the models more generalized. It means that the information that passed through one neuron to another could be classified using basically this function. And in the past, this function is a very basic function. They use the binary threshold function. So it means whatever information come in, whatever information come in, wx plus b, here. If it pass the threshold values here, the output will become 1, otherwise will become 0. So it will be easier for model to train because it has been set into a set of 2 values only. Output will be in terms of 2 values only. So that's how they derive the concept of neurons or perceptrons, trying to learn the decision functions, and depends on the pattern vectors or the vector of x that comments. The output y is a functions of the weight sum of input, with the weight matrix combined with the bias, And the function here, it's initially used binary threshold, like I said, but in recent years, they have invent many different functions. It's also called activation function as well, that the functions that could bound the output from each neuron combined together into a set of values and could make a training more regularized and also faster as well. So that's the concepts of individual parameters to create a perceptron in neural networks. But this one is only one single neuron, And when you want to use it to represent many different size of vectors, you might have to use many different neuron. We'll call it in terms of node as well. Individual neuron, you might call it in terms of nodes, and the layers, we'll call it layers because a sets of nodes in each layer represent number of nodes in each layer. A very basic neural network will comprise the input layer, output layer, and maybe only one hidden layer. But in this example, I have shown the 2 hidden layers. The number of nodes in hidden layer doesn't have to be equal, okay? And you can configure as many as you wish. And I've been talk about the function here, the activation function here. It's very much important because, like I said, that it helped regularize the whole model and it increased the generalization. It means that it could learn in objects and convert to the minimum loss easier. Many different activation function lists here. This one is the original one. And they're also piecewise linear sigmoid. Sigmoid is quite similar to threshold, but instead of sharply change from one value to another, it has been slowly changed from one value to another. And the most powerful one that I have heard is this one. This one is simply 0 at certain values of x, but otherwise the values will become x. So the function is mapped between 0 and x, and it is called the rectified linear rectified linear unit, or ReLU. So the selection of activation function is quite important, but I think there's a lot of more details in terms of neural networks. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it in more details, but the choice of it depends on the applications as well. But in here, we'll use the set of functions for object recognition. So one missing thing that I haven't mentioned here is because it's called machine learning, right? It's called machine learning. From input that we put in the neural network or machine learning or our classifier will have to result with some output that we will expect. But then there are a lot of weighting values that involved for each for each transition from one layer to another. So there's a lot of weighting values, and these values are parameters that the models it's learning. So that is the main sets of parameters that they have been learning. And the technique that they have learned, the weighting values, they use the optimization, trying to use, one technique is called back propagations, trying to, first they will sort of randomly select the weighting values in the neural networks, and then they pass the input through the neural networks. They find the output and find the output that they have predict, compare with the actual output, and the difference between the design and the actual output will be used to update it or the weighted in or the weights in neural networks. And there are so many different techniques for optimizations, and like the one that that one, it's very basic one, it's called the SGD, and we will see it in the demo. SGD, it's sort of stochastic gradient descent, right? Trying to propagate the error from the last layer to, you know, the first layer, and trying to update the weight to, so until the output very close to the actual output. And the basic measure when they will do training is something called loss. And you can guess that it's actually the difference between the actual values and the design values. So these loss values will be used to update it all the weight in neural networks. So that's a part of the basic neural networks. We'll train them. And then once we get a weighting values that provide a minimum loss possible, it means that if we can use that neural network, we can use it for object recognitions and maybe get the output very close to the actual output, right? So when we use the models, once we calculate all the weight values, we can use the model now. So I go back to this object recognition flow. In the first part, I talk about the training process. The model neural network will be learned from here. And once all the weights has been calculated, we will use this model for identifying the object, the new incoming image in prediction process. But to evaluate the models while we're training, we'll use loss, right? But how do you evaluate? How do you evaluate an output of the model with the unseen data set? Unseen data set. I refer to unseen data set because it's new image that has not been in the training process before, but we'll use it to, you know, to evaluate our models is very accurate or for the unseen data set or not. So this part of evaluation I have put in the following slides. It's about the performance evaluations, but this one is particularly for image classifications. If you remember that I'll talk about the image segmentations in segmentation topic as well, right? And it's also have its own measurements. It's also have its own measurements or its own metrics for evaluations. And for image classification, it's also have its own measurements as well. And the popular ones I'll show you in here. The evaluations of the image classification basically start from we will take a look at in the basic problems of two-class problems, and we usually write it down in terms of something called confusion matrix. The confusion matrix will list the actual class and the predicted class and the predicted class. For example, you have an image of person. So person, when you can classify a person, the output will be class equal to 1. But if not person, the class will be equal to 0, right? So this one is actually actual class of an image. But what about the predicted class? The predicted class. So whenever you have an image, you would probably want them to completely, 100% completely, correctly identify the object in the classifications. You would probably want class 1 to identify as class 1. This one you would decide to be a high values. But if it's actual class 1 or it's human, but when they're predicted as the class 0, it's mean that it's wrong, right? So this wrong, it's mean that it's called false negative. False negative. It's mean that the image is human, but you cannot detect human. You thought that it's non-human. So in this case, we call it misclassify. It's called miss. About the other class, for non-person, for example, non-person, you would probably want an image that contain no person correctly identify that there is no person. So you would want the values that classified as no person will be high as well. So basically you want TP to positive, TN is true negative will be very high values. So it means that your models is high accuracy. Another type of misclassification is false positive. It's when there is no person, but you have predicted that there's a person in the image. So in this case, it's called false positive. And sometimes you heard about the false alarm as well. So whenever the fire alarm ring, but there's no fire, so that is false alarm. It's the same thing. There's no human, but it has been predicted as a human. So it's called false alarm. So confusion matrix is very good start for you to take a look at the performance of your classification models. So you see that whether which class has been classified into what class. For example, you have so many different class. You maybe have like, airplane and bird. Maybe airplane and bird would misclassify to each other. So you maybe have to find some other features that could separate between airplane and bird or something like that. It will be first start for you to evaluate your models and do some error analysis as well. So that is called accuracy. When you combine true positive and true negative together and divide it by the whole data set. So it should be maximum possible equal to 1, right? Very close to 1. But there are also some other aspects to take a look at the performance as well in image classification. For example, precisions and recall. For precision and recalls, you'll see that it will take a look at true positive. But the values here, the denominator, is a summation of true positive and false positive. So let's take a look at where is false positive. So it's here. So the combination of here. So it means it's take a look at the precision. It's the ratio of true positive and the whole sets of prediction as the class as a positive class, like how many of them I mean, like in case of the example of person classification, they may take a look at, if we take a look at all persons, how accurate that all the persons that they have been detected are really a persons. So that is how precisions measure. And the recall, take a look at true positive as well. But for denominator, take a look at true positive and false negative. So it means that for all human in the whole data set, how the model has been misclassified. So there are two aspects that they take a look. So you can take a look at error in different aspects when you take a look at error, precision, and recall. And there's a lot of, you know, questions when you guys work in machine learning or computer visions. They will ask that which one you will give a higher priorities. It will be very difficult, and it depends on the application as well. Some application it might want to decrease number of false positive. Some application might want to decrease false negative. But there are also other choice of F measure. F measure is a combination of precision and recall together. You maybe want to, you know, take a look at this one if you cannot decide which one to take a look at. These are the values, only single values. If you want to take a look at the trend or the performance of the models, there are also some other metrics like ROC curve and PR curve, which plot the precision and recalls and see different aspects again. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it in more detail. So now we'll know briefly about neural network, and we want to use neural network to identify human from in here in this example is to identify the handwritten digits using Hock features combined with neural network. So in this case, I have prepared the demo for you. So I think I will briefly talk about it a little before we continue to the CNN. So in the demo that I have given you, you can run it like, you know, very easily, hopefully no error. So firstly, you have to download the dataset, the image dataset. Once you download it, you can take a look at the shape in an image. In this case, the function load data, I can, you know, separate them in terms of the training and the testing data sets, as you remember from the object recognition flow for training and predictions. So X-train, Y-train will be used for training process, but X-test, Y-test will be used for prediction. And it's looked as an unseen data set. So we will not use the testing data set in the training process at all. All right, so I print the shape of X-train. X-train will have in total 60,000 samples. So there are 60,000 samples, and each sample contains a number of pixels in this. So it contains 28 by 28 number of pixels to represent each image. So for X-train, you have this much of data set. How about X-test? So I will take a look at X-test and see the shape of it. So you'll see that X-test will have 10,000. So we will use 10,000 for evaluations and 60,000 for training, okay? And if you want to visualize a little bit in particular image, you can use Matplotlib. And I have used Matplotlib and visualize X-train in the first sample in index 0 and take a look at all pixels. So the first index in X-train has this image. So it should be number 5, right? Number 5. So I'll show Y-train, it should, you know, be correct, corresponding to the original image as well. So let's take a look at some other image. For example, we'll take a look at X-test. X-test, and maybe we'll, because we have like 10,000, so maybe I'll look at 9999. It should not be so complicated. So let's take a look at X-test index 9999. So Y-test would show the index 9999 as well. Okay. So this number is 9, right? And the label data is number 9 as well. So this X that I will use for training and evaluation for testing is the feature descriptor. Is that correct? No, it's the original image. Sorry, we haven't put Hawk features just yet. It's the original image. And Y here is the something we call it a label data, which is the correct result for particular samples in the image. For example, like I show the Y-test in here, like 5 corresponding image, number 5, and 9 corresponding image that has the label data, number 9. Okay, so I think I talked about everything. Sometimes you maybe heard about it in terms of label data or target, or that's all I can think of right now. Yeah. Okay, so that's the original image and the target. In the next cells, I will show that I will use histogram of oriented gradients combined with multi-layer perceptron or neural networks. So first start, import some libraries and put some random seed for reproducibilities, but it will be useful when their random function is called. Now let's take a look at the process in the details. Oh, I don't have to load the dataset again if I load it from the previous cell already. So here I load the dataset, but the same exact format. The first step is do pre-processing. So we'll do normalization. So maybe first we'll change a type of dataset, but we also normalize with 255. So that would make our image will have the values in the range of 0 to 1 only. So it will be, same equally distribute in the range of 0 to 1. But these are the image, right? They have like many different samples and in terms of image. Next, I will use Hawk features. Apply on each sample in the image. So in each X trained, I call it feature. It actually should be like one image. These features in X-train will use HOG functions to calculate feature descriptor. And in this case, we have reshaped it into the same shape, but they all have 28 by 28 anyway. The orientation bin, we use 9. We used to use 8, right? But now we change to 9. The pixels per cell is 14 by 14. And the number of blocks is 1 by 1. Cell per block is 1 by 1. And that is the HOG for particular samples. So next, I just create a list of histogram-oriented gradients and append all the feature descriptor into this list. And then I assign them into the variables called HOG feature for training. In the next step, in HOG features, the values are quite vary. I think the values will be very varies because it's accumulations of the magnitude from different orientation, right? So they have proposed to apply feature normalization using techniques max absolute So they use the maximum absolute values for normalize the whole set of training features. But before we get that particular values, for normalization, have to find the parameter from the training set first, and then apply the transform, the normalization transform using this function. So now we get a features descriptor that is ready to put in the machine learning. So next step, we train the classification models. We'll start from import the multi-layer perceptron functions, and I use it in scikit-learn. And for this particular set of this line is I initialize the model using the activation functions called ReLU. If you remember from the ReLU as the activation function for each neuron or each perceptron. And in this multi-layer perceptron, we'll have a set of hidden layers in this set. It means that it has two hidden layers. One layer has 100 nodes, another has 100 nodes. I can't remember this alpha. I think it's about normalization in some way. But I have limit a number of training looped into only 20 iterations. In this slide, I initialize model. In the next slide, I start training model. In Python, when they train model, they always use the keyword or the function fit. And inside, you have to put the feature descriptor and the target or the label data corresponding to each samples, the target for each sample. And then you can run this and you can see the score from the training, And I think they use accuracy. I think it's a default, they've used accuracy. So this step, training the models, sorry, it's like pop in, pop out. In this step, we train the models and we evaluate the training accuracy. For the next step, we will use the model for prediction. So we'll have the model that trained from here. We will use that for predictions. But before we use it for prediction, here we will use it for prediction, we have to prepare a feature descriptor for testing data set. And in this step, I follow the training data set. So I start to create a feature descriptor for using Hawk features, and then combine them all into a list for each sample and assign them into a Hawk feature test and do the normalization using the same setting of training data set. And I will use that to calculate the score for the testing data corresponding to the testing levels. So I think we can run this very fine because it does not take so long, even though we have like 60,000 image, but 60,000 image is very small size, like 28 by 28. So it takes a while, right? Now the first iteration come and it showed the result in terms of loss. If you remember, the loss is the difference between the desired output and the actual output. And you see loss is getting decreased in the higher iteration number. And I have the iteration number into 20. So the training score is accurate at about 88.3%, and testing score, the model for unseen data set is accurate at 89.22. There's a warning has been said that, oh, you can still train more. So you can still train them more. You can remove the max iteration. It will take a while for training. And the next set of code, I use the models. To predict individuals image. And I do the same. I have to calculate Hawk feature descriptor for that particular image. In this image, I use the image index number 5 in testing data set, and I show it here and also present the labels here too. And then calculate Hawk features and then use predict on the models to predict this feature descriptor, and it show a correct result of number 1. So this one is a result from predicting a new image or an incoming image or an unseen image. So that's the workflow for the first approach. In traditional approach, using handcraft features that we propose, we use HOG, and then followed by the basic neural networks. All right, we still have another techniques, which is the convolutional neural network. So we have done MNIST with Hawk feature combined with neural network. Next, because we use Hawk feature and fix them as a feature representation, this particular object. And there are modern approach that the feature can be learning by themselves. They can learning by themselves. And the technique, I call it, as the deep learning techniques because it's learning everything. So instead of separate into 2 processes, we combine them into 1 process, trying to estimate the features best fit the data set, and then followed by the classification process. So there are, I'm sure you heard a lot about deep learning, and I think it's a good opportunity for last lecture to talk about it a little bit, but in a very fundamental. So as you know about neural network from previous sections, now we only add a little bit keyword of convolutional, and you are familiar with the convolution already from from the chapters that we talk about the frequency domains of filtering, because it's very similar to convolution, just you have to flip the filter first. And you know what? I've just heard from, not just heard, I have taken a look at the detail of the convolutional neural network nowadays. They actually use filtering. They didn't do convolution. I think it saved the time to flip all the filter, and doesn't make a lot of difference. And we're not using it in frequency domain. So as far as I know, the convolutional neural network, I think they use filtering process. They didn't flip the filter, or maybe they assume that the filter has been flipped. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's very funny. So deep learning has been evolved or initially invented from the neural network, and the deep learning has been applied firstly with the image processing, because image contains a lot of pixels, so they can represent a large data set compared to any other types of data set. So deep learning has ability to learn the representation of features based on the samples or the incoming data or the training data set. And the state of the art, or the first of all deep learning model is called the convolutional neural network, or CNN, or ConNet, right? And it can be used for classification and regression. And the basic idea to design CNN is they're trying to recognize patterns with minimum pre-processing. So maybe they not only reduce the feature extraction, in some case, maybe they take all the steps into 1 step using only deep learning. I talk about it in a whole, but it actually a variance for deep learning. But in here, we'll talk about only about object recognition, okay? So in this lecture, I will particularly focus on a very basic one, a basic architectures of the convolutional neural network is called LINET. LINET. I think Li stands for the last name of the author of this paper. I think Jan LeCun. I'm sure many of you know about Jan LeCun, right? Because I think he's a chief scientist in Facebook, right? So he's very famous. And of course, there are among first networks in the family of deep learning. And if you take a look at that, the input image could have a very small image size. Maybe in that year, the computations are not so high yet. So the size is 32 by 32. The process contain a convolution called convolution process, and sometimes we call it convolution layer. And this is the feature maps is the output from the convolution layer. The second process is do subsampling, but they have their way to subsampling them. They call it pooling to make feature maps more compact or basically smaller size, but yeah, more compact and contain like high dense of information. So we call it pooling. And they repeat the convolution again and followed by the subsampling or pooling again before they wrap it all up using fully connection layer. Fully connection layer. What is fully connection layer? Actually, it's just the ordinary neural networks. So basically, all the nodes has been connect to each other. So that's basically fully connected layer. I could refer to this architecture. It's actually fully connected layers. Sometimes you might heard about it in terms of fully connected dense layer as well. I think dense layer as well. So what's next? So the last one is fully connected, but they have some extra, but we will not use it. We will use a modified version of LINET. They use output using Gaussians. I think use it for the activation function for the the last layer in the last layer. But nowadays, Gaussian the Gaussian activation function is not really popular for object recognitions. All right, so you'll see that so the last group will be fully connected. So there are like 5 different main process, even though there are 2 layers for fully connected. So I guess that's why it's called LINET 5. LINET 5. But the main layers comprise convolutional layers, poolings, and fully connected. For convolution, you are familiar with convolution already. Basically, you have an input image. It could be an input image for this layer. For this layer will be input image. But for convolution in this layer, input will be a feature map. So whatever input, it will have like a certain shape, right? For example, this one, an input is an image of 32 by 32 by 3 because it's an RGB image, right? So in the first layer, you have to do the convolution with a filter, and you can define the size of filter. It means that the filter will represent. If you remember from convolution and filtering, you remember that filtering process or convolution process is how you identify the correlations of particular filter on an image, right? So in this case, it's the same. So you have one filter, you convolute on an image. You convolute on an image where they have a high correlation. It will show a high values in the output, and the output will call a feature map. So basically, input convolve with filter will resolve with the output called feature map. Feature maps. But what is filter? What is filter? So this filter, you can identify the initial size, but the process of training convolutional neural network will have to find all the values in the filter. So these are the values or the parameter that the model will have to calculate. So the larger filter size will also give a burden to models. It means that it has to learn a lot of parameters, But it could represent more information as well. So it's a trade-off. So yeah, there's a convolution. Like I said, input convolve with convolution is this, right? with a set of filter, you will get a feature map. Basically, the correlation of image and the learning filter. And so this is the parameter that you will have to calculate. And the output, next slide probably show the output. The output from the convolution, which is feature map, this feature maps, right? So the convolution of 5 by 5 by 3 on this image, the center is here, right? If there are no padding, it means that they will have to flight the filter in only area of an image that has the values only. So it's basically inside the image. The output of the feature map will have 28 by 28 by 1. This 28, the values has been decreased from 32 to 28 because you see the size of filter is 5 by 5. So it reduced the size on the top 2 pixels, bottom 2 pixels, left, right, each for 2 pixels. And for this one, because the filter has 3 dimensions as well, so they all combine, they do convolution in 3 dimensions. So the result of feature map will have only 1 dimension for the third dimension, only size of 1. But whenever you have a filter for convolution, they will not use only 1 filter. They will have like many filters. For example, if you have 5 by 5 by 3 filter, it means that you will ask the model to learn 6 different filters to represent this particular image. The output of feature map will have 6 different feature map as well. The output of feature map will have 6 multiplied by 28. Sorry. It should be 28 by 28 by 6. So in here, I think I talk about it in the next slide already. In this case, no padding. So the size of output is smaller. But I think in our demo, we will pad the original image to the same size. So I think the output will have the same size as the original image. But the output here will be 1 for one particular filter. This for 6 filter, the output will have 6 multiplied by 28 by 28. The next layer is pooling layer. The pooling layer is basically make a feature map smaller because they have thought that, if you maintain the bigger size of feature map along a very deep neural network, you will have a lot of parameters to learn along the way before you get an output. So they have decreased the size. They call the process is pooling. But how do you decrease the size? The way they do it, they divide them into non-overlapping set of cell, right? For example, this one, they have represent 2 by 2 pooling matrix. So for each of them will be decreased to only 1 pixels. 2 by 2 original pixel will be decreased to only 1 pixels. And there are many different techniques to represent the original feature maps. For example, this one, they've used max pooling. So it means that they maintain the information that is the highest and propagate them through the next layer in the deep learning. So the max for this one is 8, and the max for this one is 4, and max for this one is 3. So basically, to change from this layer to subsampling, so only the size is reduced and no parameter required to learn in this process at all, because the process is only just reduce the size of feature map, that's all. Let's continue to the last layer, which we already talked about it because it's just fully connected layer. Whatever input come, whatever the input come, it could be input could be a feature map. Before you put into the fully connected, you have to flatten them first into terms of a vector before you propagate them through using fully connected layer. And it's just the traditional or the ordinary neural network. So all the nodes will be connected using all the weight values. So if I let you select which layer requires a lot of parameter to learn, the most parameter for learning, can you guess? In convolutional neural network, the basic one, this basic one, they basically have 3 main layers, and in each layer we have some parameter to learn. Which layer has the most parameter to learn? Can you guess? Can you guess? You would probably say that, oh, it depends on the design too, right? Depends on the design too. Okay, so for convolutional layer, all you will have to learn is just a set of features here and combine together. For pooling, no parameter. For the last fully connected layer, millions of weighting values to be learned in this process. So mostly neural networks has, mostly in convolutional neural network for the basic one. I can't remember for the high level or the advanced one. Mostly the parameters that they have to be learned, it's all in the dense layer or the fully connected layer. So next step, I will show you the demo for the convolutional neural networks for object recognition for MNIST dataset, but there are some key parameters that I might have to mention briefly. Similar to neural network, they have to have loss functions for updates or the weight in CNN. And for binary classification, they suggest to use binary cross entropy. And for multi-class classification, they suggest to use the categorical cross entropy. For the metric or the evaluations, this one will be used when you predict a new image. So in this case, you will, maybe it's popular to use accuracy. When you train convolutional neural networks, there are keywords that call epoch. An epoch is you can set a number of times that you pass the training set for training the models. The higher number of epochs mean that you train the training data sets quite many of times, and it could take a longer time as well. And batch size is the number of training instant, the training instant before updates or the weight values in convolutional neural networks. Basically, whenever you get a new or incoming sample or data set, you will probably take them to the output and find a difference with the actual output and then propagate the difference to calculate the weighting values in the neural networks. But they also have another way to use batch size. So instead of individual data sets and update all the weight, they update the weight when they train in a set of batch size that could increase the training time. The last one is one-hot encoding. At first, I didn't put it in here, but in case that you might not familiar. One-hot encoding in here, you will see in the demo that we will use it in the label data. If you remember the train and the test, if you remember, it's a categorical data set. It's a category. So the number of 0 to 9 will have category 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And testing as well. But in this case, you cannot use this in training neural networks because values is important. If you increase the values, it means that there's a trend from 0 to 9, and it seems like a regression more than classification. So we have to apply one-hot encoding to convert the categorical variable 0 to 9 to a binary vector for output. So that's why in the last layer output, it depends on the number of class. If you have 10 class, you will have 10 nodes for output that represent the one-hot encoding, that represent the binary values for each class to become one when they have found the highest probability for each class. So that is a brief for convolutional neural network. So now I will show the demo that you can play with it. You can run it, and I think it should work very fine. So the last demo today is convolutional neural network, right? And as I show the mechanisms of convolutional neural network, hopefully you'll remember some parameters here. So in here, I'll change to use the Keras models. That is, I think, is the simplest framework for you to implement convolutional neural networks. But you know, it's very simple, so it's very hard to modify them as well if you want to modify them into a different way. So it will be very difficult. You might have to use some other framework, but it's easy for learning for now using Keras. So first, again, I have load the data set using MNIST load data set and do pre-processing. As you can see that I'm trying to do the same with Hawk features, and then followed by do some pre-processing before we put it in convolutional neural network, because it requires you to prepare the data set into a certain dimension. For example, this one you have 60,000 multiplied by the size of image, right? And you will have to add another one which represent the channel of image. It's 1 for grayscale and it's 3 for RGB image. That's the example. And this particular code show the one-hot encoding. So you get Y-train and convert it to categorical variables in terms of binaries using number of class here. Next, we'll create a models. In a very simple Keras. If you want to create a sequential models, a very simple one. So I'll start with sequential. The first layer is convolution. I think I should open the slide altogether, so it will be easy for you to compare. Maybe I'll use this one. So the first layer is the convolution layer, followed by pooling, convolution, pooling, and fully connected. So in here, we'll start from convolution, pooling, convolution, pooling, and then we flatten them, followed by the fully connected layer called dense. And this is the number of nodes that I have used, 500 number of nodes. I have skipped the activation function here. If you can remember, all the neuron or the perceptron will have to find the weight values of input, but you have to be put in the functions before, transition to the next layer, which is called the activation function. This will help generalize the models, make the models learn faster, convert to minimum loss faster. So we use Lilu, and it has been proved that it helped training faster. But for the last layer, because here we use fully connected with the number of nodes equal to number of class, like I said here, number of class here. So we'll use the last layer is dense and number of class here. And we bound them with the functions of softmax. I haven't put the information of softmax here, but basically it is used for multi-class classification. The probability for each the class combined all together will become 1. And the activation function will be different for binary classification. Okay, so be careful for the problem that you are trying to solve, or the parameter could be changed. And here we compile them. It actually means that we initialize the models, and the loss metrics that we are going to use is cost entropy, the optimizer, and the metric we are going to evaluate is accuracy. So you can do training using fit functions and evaluate on training data and testing data. So here below show the architecture of these models. You can take a look at it in here. And the right-hand side is the parameters that each individual layers has to be learned. For example, like this one, you have input the filter of 5 by 5, filter of 5 by 5. It's 5 by 5. The number of filter is 20. So the number of parameters that you have to learn is 5 by 5 by 20, right? And it should be equal to 500, right? But if you remember, we still have another parameter called bias in every filters that we use. So you have to add 1 as the parameter bias into a parameters that the models has to be learned from the filter here, and then multiply by the number of all filters. So in here will be equal to 520. And this is the number of parameters that to be learned for the first layer. And so on, you can calculate them all by yourself. If you have a question, you can let me know. And if you remember here, the dense function will require the maximum number of parameters to be learned, as you can see, right? But for the convolution, only small parameter to be learned. A lot of parameters came from, if you remember, that they are connected every node all together. That's why the parameter is quite a lot. In here, I train 10 epoch, and we'll get accuracies about nearly 95%. So it's very high accuracy. But if you try them by yourself, you will see that. So I will open the new set of code, and then I'll run it again. but I'll change it to, only 5 epochs. So it will be quicker, only 3 epochs. Okay, so I'll let it run. So you'll see that it will take a while before it finishes. So to summarize, I give you some idea of the techniques for object recognition using the traditional one based on the gradients or Hawk feature and the convolutional neural network for the modern one. For the image classification trend, they will actually has a large data set called ImageNet, and I think they have been ranging used for challenge from 2010 to 2017, and I think now they have moved to focus in something else. But image classification for specific application is still important. It still require development and research to help out. And for the train for image classification, because I've shown you LeNet, right? LeNet has 5 different main layers, and input and then output. In the next couple of years later, the computational has been developed. The hardware has been developed quite a lot, like GPU and stuff. So they're trying to develop the deeper and the wider and the more flexible layers and introduce many key features to optimize the models for classifications using GPU and parallel computations. And these are the key models or the state-of-the-art models in that particular times. I think they have won the ImageNet challenge for a number of years, but it depends on each of the models. AlexNet, I think, is about 212 or something, but Google LeNet and VGG is the winner and the runner-up in 2014, and ResNet, I think it's in 2015. In 2019, they have proposed another one called EfficientNet, and I have heard that it's very powerful for image classification. The idea of ImageNet is have like a family of neural network. I think they maybe have like B0 to B7 or something, and they have flexibilities in terms of scaling. So they have a variance in terms of a wider, deeper models, and you can use this set for your applications. If you don't have large number of data sets, you can still also use deep learning because the concept of transfer learning has been introduced later on, make it more flexible for many applications. I think this one is the last slide, so hopefully you see some idea of object recognition. I think this one is repeat. I forget to remove from the previous slide. And you can see that they have focused more on specific applications, and the trend will go through object detection and segmentations more. And if you see the models here, you see SIF is here in 1999. Oh, HOX is here. HOX is here. And move on. So I think LeNet start quite early, but getting very popular in this era for deep learning. And as you can see that these are the group of deep learning for image classification. And if you remember from segmentation, these are the group of model of deep learning for image segmentation. That's one recognition. On the right hand side, I think it's the same, but I think this one limit 2016, and I found this one has shown like, you know, furthermore, but this one is swapped a little bit. EfficientNet work very well for object recognition or image classification. I think this area it's sort of image classification, but on the top one, if you remember, We have not talked about anything. I think the top one, oh, I cannot identify, but some of them are object segmentation. Yeah, segmentation. So you can see that the train it start from object classification and continue to object detection and also specific application as well. So I think that's a train, and the future train, it will be, I think the small data set would be a train for how can you develop models that could learn a small set of data set, because sometimes data sets very hard to find, and everyone wants to do machine learning, everyone wants to do deep learning. So yeah, basically that's the object recognition for today. So there's one question. Oh, I'm so happy. Why there are 6 feature maps? Oh, I've just defined them. 6 feature maps. I just defined them. It means that it could be anything. It could be anything. For example, in the demo, I use in the demo here, I didn't use 6 features. I used 20 for the first layer, and I used 50 filters for the second layer. So I was just, it could be any. Oh, sorry, you asked about feature maps, right? Feature maps. So feature maps is the output from filtering. So it depends on the number of filters. For example, we have 20 filters. The output feature map will be 20 dimensions of feature maps as well.
อาจารย์ครับ
ค่ะพอดีกำลัง
as we have to fix the input picture shape
sorry
ต้องฟิกไหมครับไอ้รูปที่เป็น input อะขนาดต้องฟิกไหม
อะไร product นะอีกทีได้ปะ
ก็คือว่าตัวรูป input อะครับต้องฟิกขนาดไหม
ใช่ถูกต้อง
เป็นทุกงานด้วยใช่ไหมครับแบบว่าต่อให้เป็นเปลี่ยนข้างในเป็นอันอื่น
ใช่สำหรับ CNN นะใช่ค่ะแต่ว่าโมเดลอื่นๆเดี๋ยวนี้สามารถใส่แบบ flexible size ได้แหละแต่สำหรับตัวเนี้ยใช่ค่ะ
ขอบคุณครับ
ค่ะ So your friend asked if the input has to be fixed size. So I have to say that for these basic models, it has to be a fixed size of inputs. But in many advanced techniques that I've shown you in the train, some of them might not require that input has to be the same size. So I want to answer past it for question that why 6 feature map, because in here I asked to convolute 6 5 by 5 filters. So the output will have like 6 feature maps here. Okay. So if you don't understand or if anything not clear, just let me know again. Oh, I take a lot of time, even though I try to reduce all the slides. So we'll still have some more minutes. So I'll let you do my course view then. Okay. I have 2 questions in my course view, but you can answer very briefly. Here. So the question will ask the pro and the con, the pro and the con of self-learning features, and the pro and the con of the handcrafted features engineering. Basically, self-learning is deep learning. Handcraft is hot feature. So I give you maybe 5 minutes, okay? But if any students finish, you can leave before, but don't forget to submit this in class. But if you finish, you can leave, or if you want to see the result of the the questions, you can wait a little bit, moments, maybe 5 minutes. So
อาจารย์ครับ
ค่ะ
after this class, can I have a Q&A session about the homework in Discord?
Oh, of course. I will be there. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ison? No?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So 3 minutes. Or 2 minutes. Okay. So go back to it's here. So let's see a view from your friend. Because I have just shown like a very short demos and haven't get a chance for you to run it, but you can try it later. No. So I wasn't very sure that you will see some aspect. There's some answers. So for the first questions, I have been asking about the deep learning first, right? The pro for deep learning, some of your friends said that giving better result, using time for train. A very key message here is when we use the self-learning features, or in our examples, we use CNN, you'll see that it will take a while for training and testing as well. And because of the parameters, quite a lot. I haven't compared for you with the HOC with neural network, but you can calculate yourself, or the parameter for learning is only in the neural network. So basically the parameters for CNNs are quite a lot. So it takes quite a number of time to train and test. But yeah, the benefit is you don't have to, design feature or extract feature by yourself. And sometimes the feature is could be better represent the data set compared to what you have been, extracted by your own design features. And your friend was saying that the feature is meaningful, so it's very difficult to extract. Yeah, it's meaningful. It's difficult to extract. Sometimes features maybe not meaningful. For self-learning, hopefully it's meaningful and trying to contribute all the features to represent each category. So that is how the objective of CNN trying to work on. And anything else? Yeah, it's quite take a long time for deep learning. And you might not see clear example from here, but to be able to learn a number of parameters like that, like the number of parameter here, you see in total parameter that you have to learn is about 1 million parameters. You will have to use quite a number of image or data set. So that will be another important factor that you will have to concern when you want to select between self-learning or handcraft. But it showed quite a good result. As you can see that I have used a very simple one, and it doesn't, I took it like 3 epoch, but it gives a very competitive accuracy compared to HOC already. So the accuracy is quite promising if you have enough data set. Anything else? Easy to implement for Keras, right? I can't extract key feature of the problem. Let's see the next one. The next one is handcraft. The handcraft. I really like this answer. The benefit of the handcraft, if you can reduce, you can reduce set of information by yourself. But the disadvantage is you will have to know the problem in depth. You have to really know the problem very well. Yeah, and the feature it's fixed, but could be better represent compared to self-learning. So I think you answer quite an insightful answer. Very good. A very good answer. Yeah, so basically that's all that I'm trying to come up. Anything else? I talk about the data set already. Let me see, anything else? Dimension not so much because we will mostly focus on the parameters. Another thing is for HOC features, you can see that I'm trying to give you a visualization easily, but for CNN, it's very difficult to visualize or inside, especially the parameters. In here, I show the last demo, show the filters that has been learned from our models, and you can see that it's very difficult for you to interpret. So the interpretation for human perception, it's very difficult for the self-learning models. So yeah, basically, hopefully you get some idea from object recognition using the modern and traditional one. It doesn't mean that you have to go to the new trend convolutional neural networks. Many works, they combine everything together. And, especially for practical application, you need to use a lot of technique combined together. Even the data set, sometimes they use different modalities of data set. For example, medical data set, you have different modalities like PET scan combining with CT scan, something like that, to make a better diagnosis accuracy, something like that. So just be aware that there are some traditional techniques and you can use it and combine with the modern one. Okay, so I think that is all, and past the time for 10 minutes, but I hope it's okay. So do you have any questions so far? Because I will be standby in Discord today. If you have some question, you can ask me there. And next week, I would have to ask you to be in Zoom instead of YouTube, because we will have invited speaker, and I just want you to be in Zoom more than in YouTube if possible. Okay. Okay, so no questions. So I hope everything is okay. And can you do homework? Okay, it's homework. Fun for you. do you enjoy doing homework? No one answered. It's very difficult. I mean, like, yeah. All right, so I think that is all. So if no questions, I will be in Discord. Okay, so today is all. I'll see you next week at the same time. Okay. Okay, goodbye everyone. See you next week. Bye.